Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, I'm talking about the new album from Norken, Galaxy Driven. Alright, I've been excited for this one. Norken is one of the many aliases for Lee Anthony Norris. I've covered this guy quite a few times on this channel. You may know him for his more ambient stuff as Nacht Plank, or his work in Autumn of Communion, alongside like 10 other collaboration projects which can conveniently be sampled through in his Italian Works and Italian Works 2 compilations, which he has released under his own name. Check those out. But I personally know him best for his work under the name Metamatics. The stuff he did under that name, especially his earlier albums like Dope for the Robot, aka a Metamatics production, Mind Mushing Git, aka Midnight Sun Pig, and of course, Neo-Ouija, showed this kind of low-key, minimal style of IDM with consistently and instantly memorable melodies and grooves. His stuff under that name was my first ever exposure into IDM, and those projects especially continually hold up as classics and all-time personal favorites to this day. But his work as Norken is almost equally as important to me, very much in the same vein as his Metamatics stuff, albeit a bit more chill, a bit more deep house-ish, I guess. Some keen-eyed viewers may remember me highlighting the first Norken album, Soul Static Bureau, on my favorites of all time list, alongside those Metamatics albums I just mentioned. Even though I only had access to his first 2 albums under this name as a high schooler, they obviously had a lot of time to develop some serious nostalgia factor. Well, okay, maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. How about I just go down his studio album discography so far? Just under the Norken name, of course. Yeah, I still love this one from start to finish. Probably held up particularly high thanks to personal nostalgia and the fact that I've been listening to it regularly for so many years. But still, as I said before, lots of great low-key minimal stuff, and every groove and melody here is memorable and has latched itself into my head at some point. Highlights include Gone, Painting, Echo Ecru, Southern Solar, Motor Breeze, though there's not a single weak track in the bunch. And the track The Visit reprises a melody line from his Metamatics track Mops, which I thought was pretty cool. And this album's pretty much bulletproof as far as I'm concerned as well. It's quite a bit tighter as well, only 8 tracks compared to Soul Static Bureau's 11, and one of those 8 is kinda more like an intro. But the shorter length obviously didn't prevent him from delivering lots more refreshing and meditative material. Again, no weak tracks, but highlights include the title track, East, and Northern Soul. Also, the track Just a Phase reprises a synthpad progression from his Metamatics track Spaceman, which is cool. Oh yeah, and this was a remix album that I guess was pretty cool in case you wanted to check that out. I don't listen to it that often, but whatever. The later Norken projects don't have as strong personal nostalgia given they were particularly difficult to track down and find. This one especially. As such, I don't hold them nearly as close to me as the first 2. But coming back to this one, it was a lot better than I remembered. Still delivers those same low-key grooves and getting them to work on tracks like It Might Have Been Rain, Eastern Soul, Here, Thai Canal, and all the rest of them. And thankfully, he just made it available on his Bandcamp page, so it won't be nearly as difficult to find for you as it was for me. Here's a collab album he did with Deer that's a tad poppier than previous Norken outings, and it's pretty damn good. It's just as worth checking out as the main Norken projects. Also, the track Migrating Deserts reprises some synth licks from the Metamatics track No Condiments. I think that's the last time he did that, but whatever. And here's a collab album he did with Nyquist that he actually released just 2 weeks before this latest one, totally brand new. It's not too far off from the project I'm actually about to review, albeit less distinctive or interesting, but with more focus on retro flavors, like Mr. Fingers throwbacks and acid synths and the like. Probably not a keeper, but still pretty cool, and the track Delay Pal is a banger. But that brings us to here, his first solo album under the Norken name in 15 years. And this one I knew was going to be the real deal because there was a track on it called Western Soul, completing a series of tracks with similar names, one of each appearing on his previous 3 solo Norken albums. We already had Southern Soul, Northern Soul, and Eastern Soul. Now we got Western Soul. Needless to say, I was excited to do this video. And now I've listened to this new album, Galaxy Driven, a couple of times, And while on first listen I was maybe a tad underwhelmed by it, I then went through the other older Norken projects for comparison, and as I started to realize its similarities to those older projects, this one kept growing on me. The main thing that sticks out about Galaxy Driven over the other Norken projects is the production. In comparison to the relatively dry but nostalgic tones of the earlier stuff, the synth tones on this one are a lot sleeker and smoother. They feel like they're creating more of a sense of space. It's a similar upgrade that the later Metamatics albums like Instamatic and Body Pop had. I initially found this particular change-up to be what underwhelmed me, because the particular tones used on an album like Soul Static Bureau are so easily recognizable for me, and I can only associate with his work. They instantly make me feel like I'm 14 again. And these tones, by comparison, felt rather anonymous and almost like anyone could have done it. But honestly, going back to these older albums and then getting to this one, I realized that compositionally it's still totally characteristic of the Norken sound. These melodies and grooves haven't gotten years of replay value and nostalgia, and as such I obviously don't find these tracks as instantly comforting and memorable. But I definitely used to feel the same way about Our Memories of Winter. When I first heard that project God knows how many years ago, I thought that was a letdown from the first two and totally ran together. But as I mentioned before, it held up way better than I remembered coming back to it for this video. While Galaxy Driven's relative newness translates to an experience that may not be as instantly gratifying as the others, and sure, I still have some issues. There are tracks that blend into the mix without me noticing, and the project as a whole has a tendency to fall into the background. It's still the same Norken I know and love. It's already a grower, and it'll be interesting to see how I hold this one up in the coming months or even years. So, let's talk individual tracks. Admittedly, I have a lot of similar things to say about these 10 tracks, but they do all bring some interesting flavors in their own right. Our opener, for instance, ARP Galaxy, of course sets the tone for the album and lets you know right away what you're getting into. At first, not much more than a spacey progression of pads and some plunking bass lines, but building up into a really nice deep house groove with foot-tapping retro drum machines and lots of bubbling arpeggios. And while there's some occasional change-ups where the bass line changes texture, becomes a little more upfront, for the most part it kind of sticks to the same kinds of sounds throughout over the course of its 7-minute running time, in traditional Metamatics and Norken fashion. Yeah, this opener may take a little bit to really get going, but once it kicks into gear, this track really has a sort of muted and downtrodden beauty to it, really starting us off on the right foot. And Western Soul is even better. It stuck out to me as the best track on first listen, and still probably is. Mainly thanks to its inclusion of these almost funky slap bass lines playing throughout much of it, though going up against the super smooth and airy pads and some little breathy, wordless female vocal bits echoing out. It both feels like a callback to the Soul Static Bureau era with fairly obvious comparisons to old tracks, most notably Eve, but doing something more original with this sound and feel that separates it from that old stuff. Meanwhile, you got something like Heart Hurts, which may be the one track on here that would most snugly fit on the old albums. The synth textures, especially the main pad progression, may be a lot flatter and less spacious than other tracks on here, but it has this very warm and intimate quality to it. Again, really starting to hit some nostalgia buttons. Admittedly, the groove that builds up later on isn't quite as nostalgia-inducing, got lots of arpeggios that kinda seem to blip away ad nauseum, but still, boy did this one take me back. We do then hit one of the weaker points here, Jam Robotics, which feels more spare, less warm, more mechanical than other tracks on here, but I'm glad it's here for the sake of textural variety. The bass line is quite thumping, and the squeaking and clattering synths around it do create a feel to it that can help it live up to its title. But then it's followed up by one of my big favorites, Travelogue, which is most characterized by its whispering vocals, which I think are saying Instamatic. These little snippets help give this track a memorable hook, and the way they play up against the layers of thick and warm pads and rounded bass lines make for one of the most evocative tracks in the bunch. Now, in the second half of this album, these tracks start to feel less easily distinctive from one another, but, you know, there's still plenty of compelling material to go around. Up has maybe the fattest and most satisfying bass line in the bunch, and the way its shifting pads waver away on top every now and then is kind of catchy in its own right. Departing This Moon may be made up of all the same ingredients as the other tracks on this album, but all of them feel a little different. The basses are a little more tactile and upfront, the background pads are brighter and have kind of a more optimistic major key quality to them, and the wailing foreground pads seem to evaporate and float away in a pretty cool way. Whenever this track comes up, I'm like, ooh, this one sounds cool. But the remaining 3 tracks sort of blend in more. Odyssey sounds kinda nondescriptly similar to other tracks on here, despite carrying quite a bit of compelling drama and movement. The title track, Galaxy Driven, it sounds kinda like the opener, but viewed at a different angle, sort of. Has a lot of wiry 808 plucks and a thick and satisfyingly heavy mix of pads. Still pretty cool. And closer, Coast to Coast, ends us on a light and floaty note with its delicate electric piano-like textures going up against its thick and wavering bass lines in a way that doesn't come together as well as other tracks here, and maybe feels comparatively undercooked. Not one of the strongest album closers I've seen on a project of his. But yeah, that's Galaxy Driven. And all things considered, I'm pretty happy with what I got here. It's definitely an Norken album. While I'm not sure if this is necessarily going to be one of my favorite projects of the year, it was one that definitely made me happy to come back to and digest. I've obviously been covering Lee Norris's work through his other aliases and projects for years now, and it's been a very long time that I got a project from him that seemed to deal directly with the kinds of sounds that first got me into his stuff. It may be kinda long-winded and not every track is as interesting as the next. I don't think it quite reaches greatness for me, but it's the closest an album of his has come to hitting those same nostalgia buttons that those early Metamatics and Norken projects can do for me so easily in ages. Probably hit those buttons more effectively than his Instamatic and Body Pop albums as Metamatics did. Only time will tell how well this project will hold up in the future. It might be an honorable mention on the year-end list, it might not. I'd still probably more highly recommend the earlier Norken projects over this one if you've never heard anything he's done under this name, but I still think it's worth a shot all the same. Whatever the case, the arrival of this project undoubtedly put a smile on my face and has made this April all the better, and I'm overall feeling a 7.7 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.